Hi, my name is Helena Marschall. I'm a youth climate activist from Germany, and for the past 2 years I've been taking to the streets, I've been organising and planning campaigns, and I've been talking to a lot of people about the climate crisis in order to urge business leaders to act on the climate crisis.
Hi, I'm Nakabuye Hilda Flavia, a climate activist, founder and organizer of Fridays to Feature Uganda, and a victim to the climate crisis. Climate change is with no doubt the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. It's happening right now, but it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen by itself. Some people and countries are behind it. The planet has endured many years of abuse from the same people who are supposed to protect it. Take a look. An average 26 million people flee their homes due to climate disasters. Climate change is having a growing impact on the African continent, hitting the most vulnerable hardest.
Looking at the EU over the coming years, I feel a lot of hope, definitely, because we've seen a huge shift in priorities over the last 2 years. We've seen the climate crisis being taken more seriously on a practical policy level. And I mean, activism in its core is always hopeful because I see the possibility and I see the necessity for change, and I'm, together with other young people, I'm willing to make that happen. We see that the EU bears a huge burden of responsibility, just as one of the most privileged areas in the world, but also as one of the areas of the world that has done a lot to cause the crisis we are in, that has caused a huge share of the emissions, that were emitted historically. On an EU level, I still see a gigantic gap between what is necessary and what is being practically implemented. We see a gigantic gap between what is being promised and what is being done, between a raise in ambition in NDCs, which is great, but a raise that is still nowhere near 1.5 degrees compatible, and that may not even be compatible with the Paris Agreement. We see a Green New Deal being implemented, which is great, but at the same time we see that Green New Deal and even the plan for a raise in NDCs being undermined through practical policy decisions concerning, for instance, the Common Agricultural Policy, concerning the recovery funds still being invested in, fossil infrastructure, in gas infrastructure. We see, plans for a green taxonomy, and then we see, EU countries wanting that money to go into fossil gas. So in places, the reality of the climate crisis seems to not have completely sunk in yet, or seems to not, arrive on a political, practical level. Because at the end we know that, all these promises of being climate neutral by 2050 or, reducing emissions by 2030, these promises are, first of all, not enough anyway. But at the same time, as long as we are not doing everything to reduce emissions drastically right now, these promises mean nothing.
Agriculture is the backbone of Africa's economy and accounts for the majority of livelihoods across the continent, making us a hotspot for climate disasters. Southern Africa suffered extreme drought in 2019. The Greater Horn of Africa shifted from very dry conditions in 2018 and to floods and landslides associated with heavy rainfall in late 2019. Flooding also affected the Sahel region and surrounding areas from May to October 2019, and new diseases emerging in regions where they were previously not present. 2019 was among the extreme warmest years on record for Africa. The fifth assessment report of the IPCC warns that extensive areas of Africa will exceed 2 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels by the last 2 decades of this century. Developed countries must be ashamed of themselves given the amount of carbon they emit compared to what Africa is emitting. 100 companies are responsible for 73% of the global emissions, all of which from developed countries. In my country, Uganda, we are losing our carbon sinks at a very high rate. Wetlands are degraded, lakes are flooded, displacing about 200,000 people, submerging markets and homes with water catchment areas filled with waste. Deforestation is the work of the day. Forests sold and cleared for sugarcane, timber, and industrialization on tickets of development. Bugoma Forest, the only tropical forest we are left with, has fallen victim, leaving us with only 8% forest cover, and we may not have forest by 2040 if we continue at this rate. Our lakes are flooding, displacing about 200,000 people in Uganda. Our markets and homes are submerged in water, with our water catchment areas flooding with waste. As you can see, this is Gaba Market, but because of the overflooding of Lake Victoria's water levels rising above sea levels, everything is flooded. Water catchment areas are flooded with waste and people were displaced. As you can see, no one stays here. As an activist, every Friday, I strike for a safe environment through rallying government and communities to take climate action. I visit different schools around the world, mobilizing youth voices to make a difference. I also lead a lakeshore cleanup activity on Lake Victoria, which runs different campaigns that empower lakeshore communities to protect the lakes through promoting safe environmental practices to fight plastic pollution. We recently launched a youth-led global campaign that has brought together different people and youth movements to the cause of saving Bugoma Forest, which is facing serious deforestation for sugarcane growing.
We see that the stories we tell can move everything, and the stories we tell about ourselves and our fears and our hopes for the future can move people. And I think that is where we can look at our fellow activists from Africa and learn so much, because these are, activists literally on the front lines of this crisis, who are already feeling, the brute force of the climate crisis on a whole nother level than we are in Europe. Just because, the global south is disproportionately affected by the effects of the climate crisis that we as the global north have caused. We see activists who are not in as a privileged position as I am, still raising their voices and willing to authentically share their stories. And I think that is a moment where maybe EU leaders could, instead of inviting us so often, invite activists, from Africa to share their stories, because I think that, that in a way can convey the seriousness of the situation we are in so much more than, we as European activists can.
Combating climate change is important to youth because we constitute the biggest percentage of the population, meaning that we have the biggest stake and we are the major victims of this diverse impact. We are crucial stakeholders in the sustainability debate. We deserve a say in environmental politics because we are providing an invaluable perspective that policymakers sometimes lack.